Russia is preparing for a nuclear strike in space. And here is the most important question: how will the West respond to this? The exploration of space has always been an important and sensitive topic for the Soviet Union and later for Russia. At first, during Soviet times, it was an arms and achievements race with American ideological enemies. A race in which, it must be said, the USSR often emerged victorious. However, after 1991, with the collapse of the communist state, Russia was unable to reach the tangible level of its Soviet past and now lives more in nostalgia. Despite the triumphant statements of Russian officials, they have no victories in space. And judging by everything, none are expected. Hello everyone, my name is Anastasiia Husarieva, and today we are going to break down an extremely important case. In this episode, we will talk about the crash of a Russian rocket at the Baikonur Cosmodrome and why the Western world is wary of Russia's presence in space. We'll go through all of this step by step. In the meantime, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts about what you've heard in the comments. And as always, I will start breaking down this important topic with you step by step. So, in Russia, the launch of the Proton-M carrier rocket from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which was scheduled for December 15th, was aborted. The official reason given for the cancellation was a local inconsistency in the booster stage. The phrasing about technical nonconformity is nothing new for the Russian space industry. Similar explanations have previously been used in cases of malfunctions and accidents. As a rule, these referred to equipment failures, errors during preparation, or problems at the pre-launch check stage. However, in this case, attention was drawn to the fact that the launch was cancelled not for a new or experimental rocket, but for the Proton-M launch vehicle, which has been in operation since the Soviet era and for decades remained one of the key rockets of the Russian space program. It is precisely this fact that makes the incident significant. The Proton-M is considered a well-studied platform with a long history of operation, and problems with its launch fit into the broader picture of systemic difficulties that the Russian space industry has faced in recent years. The cancellation of the Proton-M launch occurred against the backdrop of a recent accident at the same Baikonur Cosmodrome. On November 27th, after the launch of the Soyuz 2.1, a rocket with the Soyuz MS-28 spacecraft from the launch pad, an incident occurred that resulted in damage to the launch facility. The launch itself was successful. The crew, consisting of Russian cosmonauts as well as a NASA astronaut, safely arrived at the International Space Station. However, it was later reported that a service cabin had fallen onto the launch structure. And here it's worth noting that the fact of the cabin falling was recorded by a drone flying over the launch complex. The preparations for the launch, as stated, proceeded as normal. 44 minutes before launch, the service cabin was retracted into its niche. A subsequent inspection showed that it was either not securely fastened or the retaining locks could not withstand the load. As a result of the damage to the launch pad, Russia temporarily lost the ability to launch Soyuz crewed spacecraft and Progress cargo ships to the International Space Station. This accident became the biggest failure in the Russian crewed space program in the entire history of orbital exploration. The upcoming launch of the Progress MS-28 cargo ship, scheduled for December 21st, 2025, is now in serious doubt. The return of the launch pad to operation now directly depends on the timeline for repairs and the availability of the necessary components. And with that, as we know, Russia is currently having problems. On December 16th, Roscosmos announced that a full set for replacing the service cabin had arrived at Baikonur. According to official data, the launch pad is expected to be ready for launch by the end of February 2026. To restore the facility, 18 heavy-duty trucks were involved to deliver elements and equipment, as well as more than 130 employees from the Roscosmos enterprise. After the preparations are completed, specialists are to begin installing the cabin and this time conducting autonomous tests. However, experts assess the situation less optimistically than official agencies do. Launch pad number 31 is essentially the only one from which Russia can carry out manned launches to the International Space Station. The new Russian cosmodrome Vostochny is not yet used for such missions. One of the reasons lies in the trajectory for launching the spacecraft. It passes over the waters of the Pacific Ocean, where Russia does not have a full-fledged search and rescue fleet or established crew evacuation procedures in case of splashdown. Vadim Lukashevich, an expert in the space industry and former employee of the Sukhoi Design Bureau, noted that Russia has virtually no alternative launch complexes left for manned missions. According to him, the situation developed according to the principle of where it's thin, it breaks, and as a result, several important factors coincided at once. A similar assessment of the situation was given by former NASA astronaut and ISS commander Terry Virts, who flew on the Soyuz from Baikonur. He emphasized that even with efforts from Russia, restoring the launch pad could take a significant amount of time, especially considering the priority reallocation of resources toward military objectives. According to him, he is not sure that launches will be able to resume in the near future. Scott Pace, director of the Space Policy Institute at George Washington University, also points to the uncertainty of the timeline. According to him, estimates for the repair time range from relatively optimistic 6 months to extremely pessimistic up to 2 years. At the same time, he allows for the possibility that, in the event of a prolonged pause in progress spacecraft flights, some of the load could be taken on by non-Russian vehicles. Against the backdrop of these technical uncertainties and problems, international anxiety is growing regarding Russia's actions in space. In 2024, the American authorities declared a serious threat to national security. According to leading Western media, it was about the possible preparation by Russia to deploy nuclear weapons in space. The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee of the United States Congress, Mike Turner, reported that the relevant intelligence data had been provided to the congressman and called on then-President Joe Biden to declassify this information. At the same time, officials of the United States emphasized that there was no immediate threat to the country or its allies at that moment. President's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan refused to disclose details, expressing dissatisfaction that the information had become public before discussions with the White House. American media, citing anonymous officials, reported that the intelligence concerns Russia's development of anti-satellite nuclear weapons, which have not yet been deployed. According to the New York Times, this information is highly classified, and its disclosure could lead to the loss of intelligence sources, which is what caused irritation within the United States administration. The Kremlin refused to comment on these publications. The press secretary of the Russian president, Dmitry Peskov, stated that the topic is being used by the White House as a tool to pressure Congress into approving funding for aid to Ukraine. At the same time, White House National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby confirmed that the threat is specifically related to the development of weapons against satellites. And here it should be added that history knows examples of nuclear explosions in space. The United States of America began such tests back in 1958 and later conducted the secret Watermelon Project. In 1961, the USSR carried out a similar explosion. The race ended in 1963 with the signing of the treaty banning nuclear tests in the atmosphere, outer space, and underwater. In 1967, the Outer Space Treaty was signed, which prohibits the placement of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction in orbit. More than 100 countries joined this treaty. However, in 2023, Russia withdrew its ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Experts differ in their assessments of the possible consequences of a nuclear explosion in space. The head of the Institute of Space Policy, Ivan Moiseev, believes that the effect would be limited. There would be no shock wave, and the electromagnetic radiation could only disable a few satellites. In his opinion, it would take hundreds of such explosions to cause large-scale damage to global satellite networks. Ukrainian expert Andriy Kolesnik, on the contrary, points out that much depends precisely on the power of the charge itself. In his assessment, the explosion could damage hundreds of satellites or seriously disrupt global telecommunications. He believes that such actions could be seen as a demonstration of readiness to resort to extreme measures amid Russia's weakening position in the space race. In 2025, this issue returned to the agenda once again. Forbes reported that, according to Western intelligence, Russia is considering a new phase of hybrid confrontation in space, including a scenario of nuclear sabotage in orbit. Space weapons expert Elena Grossfeld from King's College London noted that such sabotage could provide plausible deniability of involvement. According to this data, one possible scenario is a nuclear explosion near the Van Allen radiation belt, which could cause cascading failures of satellites without directly striking the targets. Grossfeld describes such a scenario as an orbital version of Pearl Harbor, emphasizing that a single explosion could be a game changer in space. For decades, the Russian manned spaceflight program was considered a model of engineering pragmatism. Simple yet incredibly robust and highly reliable, no-frills spacecraft provided consistently dependable and relatively safe delivery of both people and essential cargo in turn to Earth's orbit and beyond. After the end of the American Space Shuttle program in 2011, it was the Soyuz and Progress spacecraft that became the backbone of the International Space Station's operations. They delivered crews, brought cosmonauts back to Earth, and supplied the ISS with everything necessary for its operation and for sustaining life there. In recent years, the situation surrounding the Russian space program has noticeably become more complicated. The reputation of the industry has suffered due to corruption scandals, funding cuts, accidents, and accusations against the leadership of prioritizing political objectives over scientific ones. Against this backdrop, another serious incident occurred in November. During the launch of the Soyuz spacecraft with 2 Russian cosmonauts and 1 astronaut from the United States at Baikonur, the launch pad was damaged. The service cabin is one of the key elements of the launch complex. It was hit by the stream of hot rocket gases and collapsed. The causes of the incident have not yet been determined. Both human error and technical malfunction are being considered. For its part, Roscosmos has announced the need for repairs. However, the problem is that Pad 31/6 is the only one at Baikonur from which crewed Soyuz launches are carried out. According to experts, restoration could take anywhere from several months to several years. Former NASA astronaut and ISS commander Terry Virts, whom we've already mentioned and who flew on a Soyuz from Baikonur, notes that the destruction of such an element requires time before launches can resume. He also points out the overall strain on Russian industry, which is connected to other priorities. He emphasizes that the Russian side is often forced to work with the resources it has. American private companies, particularly SpaceX and Blue Origin, are capable of delivering people and limited cargo to the International Space Station, including Russian cosmonauts. And this is an important point when we talk about restoration and repair. However, the station is critically dependent on Progress spacecraft, which provide the supply of fuel, water, oxygen, food, and spare parts, and also participate in maintaining the station's orbit. According to Scott Pace, director of the Space Policy Institute at George Washington University, other cargo vehicles, Cygnus, the Japanese HTVX, and Starliner, could partially compensate for the absence of Progress spacecraft, but only for a limited period. A prolonged interruption in their flights could create serious difficulties. Expert Vadim Lukashevich emphasizes that Russia effectively has no alternative cosmodromes or launch complexes for manned launches. According to him, the situation has worsened precisely where the system has proven to be most vulnerable. For almost 70 years, Baikonur has remained essentially a symbol of Soviet and Russian cosmonautics. It was from here that the first artificial satellite of the Earth was launched and the well-known Yuri Gagarin was sent into space. The cosmodrome survived the collapse of the Soviet Union, after which Russia began leasing it from Kazakhstan. Before the emergence of private companies, Baikonur was the only point for sending people and cargo to the International Space Station and an important source of income through commercial launches. Despite the sanctions imposed after the events of 2014, NASA and Roscosmos continued to work and cooperate within the framework of the ISS. However, reputational problems were accumulating. Incidents on the station, an emergency crew landing, and personnel scandals, all of this intensified questions about the overall state of the industry. Against this backdrop, work on the new Soyuz 5 launch vehicle continued in Russia. A few months ago, fire tests were conducted on the first stage with an engine running on kerosene and liquid oxygen. The tests were deemed successful and they paved the way for flight design tests. The rocket is being developed for the joint Baikonur project with Kazakhstan and is intended for launching automated spacecraft into various orbits. However, according to Ars Technica space analyst Eric Berger, the Soyuz 5 faces an uncertain future in the launch market. Its payload capacity of up to 17.4 tons to low Earth orbit places the rocket between the already operational Soyuz 2 and the Angara A5. The demand for this class of launch vehicles remains in question, especially considering the reduction in geostationary satellite launches and the refusal of many Western operators to use Russian rockets after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's all for now. That's all we have time to tell you for the moment. But we are keeping our finger on the pulse, and of course, we'll keep you informed about news in this field in particular. For now, I ask you to subscribe, like, and leave your comments. And as usual, we'll see you in the next broadcast. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Take care of yourselves and wash your hands with soap. Bye-bye, everyone.